Chapter 19. Tanjiro's first battle. The price of arrogance. Tanjiro had always dreamed of building a proper shrine for the god of fire. But with a large family to feed and always being strapped for cash, it remained just that, a dream. He would often tell the young Roy and Tanjiro that he was a poor excuse for a believer, and that he hoped one day they would have the means to give the fire god a place of shelter. Nothing grand, just a place that was clean and respectful. Standing at the bottom of the moss-covered stone steps, Tanjiro thought this shrine was perfect. It wasn't large or extravagant, but it had a quiet, solemn dignity. He was sure the fire god would love it. He adjusted the basket on his back. "Bro, let's go in and pay our respects. If you were to stay the night in a shrine, tradition dictated you offer thanks to the spirits within." But Roy didn't believe in gods or ghosts. He had no intention of praying. Instead, he pointed a finger at the steps. "The snow is falling hard. Why are these steps completely clear? It must have a caretaker," Tanjiro said, his face lighting up. He must be a very diligent person to be sweeping the snow this late. "Bro, maybe we'll even get a hot meal tonight." "We are the hot meal," Roy said, a smirk playing on his lips. Quote? Tanjiro's expression shifted. Before he could ask what Roy meant, the scent hit him. A sharp, coppery tang of blood. It was faint, but it was the exact same smell from the day they'd encountered the demon in the forest. Which meant, a demon. There's a demon in the shrine. The hairs on Tanjiro's arms stood on end. Roy gave him a sidelong glance. So he's not a complete idiot. He started up the steps. "Let's go," he said casually. "If we're late, we'll miss dinner." Tanjiro's face flushed. With a sharp shing, he drew the axe from his belt. He was a hothead by nature. Even in the original story, he had charged headfirst into this same shrine despite smelling blood. Courage was not something he lacked. "Don't worry, bro," he declared, the glint of the axe giving him a surge of confidence. "This time, I'll protect you." He swore to himself that he wouldn't hide behind a tree again. "Okay," Roy said, and simply stepped aside, giving him a clear path. Tanjiro froze, not sure whether to laugh or cry. But he'd been put on the spot. He had to follow through. Steeling himself, he charged up the steps. Roy followed at a leisurely pace, a thin layer of nen already coating his eyes. With Gyo, he could see everything inside the shrine with perfect clarity. It was exactly as he remembered from the story, a low-level demon that used the shrine as a lure for travelers and merchants. The rash of disappearances in the area was undoubtedly its handiwork. It had no blood demon art, but its raw strength and regenerative abilities were more than enough to dominate the local countryside. Crunch, crunch, the demon was enjoying its meal. A unfortunate traveling merchant had stopped for a hot meal, all right. The man's body was slumped against a broken statue, his entrails ripped out. The demon was chewing on a long, bloody intestine with relish. "And what do you want, my friend?" the demon growled, turning its head. Its bloodshot eyes fixed on the entrance. "This is my dining hall. It's rude to interrupt a meal." Tanjiro stood frozen in the doorway, his axe held high. He watched, horrified, as the demon took another bite. His stomach churned, and the rice balls he'd eaten for lunch threatened to make a reappearance. "Swallow it," Roy's voice said, firm and cold, from behind him. "Don't waste mother's hard work." He stepped up beside his brother. The demon pushed itself to its feet, wiping its bloody mouth with the back of its hand. It grinned, revealing a set of jagged fangs. "Two of you, excellent. I do love winter. A never-ending supply of food." "You talk too much," Roy said, and gave Tanjiro a sharp shove in the back. "Go." Caught off guard, Tanjiro stumbled forward with a cry, charging on pure reflex. Bam! A brutal knee strike sent him flying back out the door. Even the weakest demon, empowered by Muzen's blood, possessed superhuman strength and speed. Tanjiro had seen Roy fight Sato, and it had looked so easy. Now, he realized how terribly he had misjudged both his brother and his enemy. This isn't something a human can fight. The impact felt like he'd been hit by a freight train. His whole body screamed in protest. As the demon loomed over him, he managed to twist in midair and swing his axe at its neck. His instincts, at least, were sharp. Slash! Blood sprayed from the wound. The demon staggered back, clutching a deep gash in its neck that had nearly decapitated it. "An axe?" it snarled, its eyes wide with disbelief. "Not bad, kid, but a scratch like this will heal in a second." As he spoke, the bleeding stopped, and the flesh began to knit itself back together. Tanjiro remembered Sato's arm regenerating. He knew that unless he killed it, any injury was meaningless. He forced himself to his feet, gripping the axe with both hands, his eyes locked on the demon. Whoosh! The demon vanished. It moved too fast for Tanjiro's eyes to follow, appearing in his blind spot and slamming him to the ground, its hand clamped around his throat. So fast, I can't even see him. Tanjiro managed to wedge the handle of his axe between the demon's claws and his neck, but the crushing force was overwhelming. His vision began to swim with black spots. "Ha ha ha, you won't get me a second time." The demon cackled. "Now, let's see if your neck will snap." It squeezed, and Tanjiro's world exploded into pain. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. What do I do? Should I call for bro? No, I said I would protect him. I can't go back on my word. But I'm going to die. If I die, it's all over. I don't want to die, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. Bro, help me. Chapter 20. An improvised Zetsu x Dohihara's last stand. A sigh cut through the tense air. The demon's senses screamed danger. It whipped its head around. The boy with the sun-patterned earrings had appeared out of nowhere, perched silently on its back. "Friend," Roy's voice was calm, conversational. "Could you do me a favor and let him go? My brother might be a bit of an idiot, but he's good-hearted. If you kill him, the meat will spoil, you know." When did he get there? Why didn't I sense him? Dohihara's mind reeled. In his human life, he'd been a chef. Years in the kitchen had honed his sense of smell to a razor's edge. After being turned into a demon, that sense had been magnified tenfold. He could track prey not just by their physical scent, but by the unique aroma of their life force, their aura. But tonight, his nose had failed him completely. You have no scent," Dohihara rasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you even human?" He swiped a clawed hand back at Roy. A gust of wind carrying the nauseating stench of old blood washed over Roy's face. He simply leaned to the side, sliding down the demon's arm as if it were a pole. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Tanjiro by the collar and lifted him from the ground. Cough, hack, cough. Freed, Tanjiro clutched his throat, gasping for air. His face was pale, and he couldn't bring himself to look at Roy, his heart sinking with shame. So useless. In the end, bro still had to save me. Tanjiro, when are you going to get stronger? With a flick of his foot, Roy scooped up the axe Tanjiro had dropped. Pretending not to notice his brother's despair, he shoved the weapon back into his hands. Continue. Tanjiro stared. Before he could process it, another swift kick to the rear sent him stumbling forward, back towards the demon. You wanted this fight, Roy's voice echoed in the silent shrine. So you're going to be the one to finish it. The words were like nails on a chalkboard to Dohihara. He was no fool. Years of cultivating this territory, so close to the demon slayers on Sagiri Mountain, had taught him one thing: cunning. His initial clash with Tanjiro had told him everything he needed to know. The hot-headed kid with the axe was not the threat. The silent one behind him was. He focused 90% of his attention on Roy. With a burst of speed, he leapt directly over Tanjiro's head, his claws aimed straight for Roy's face. Roy slid to the side, the attack missing by an inch. Dohihara twisted in midair, transitioning into a vicious side kick aimed at Roy's head. But Roy simply arched his back in a smooth, almost lazy motion, and the blow whistled harmlessly over him. Damn it, I can't predict his movements. Why does he have no scent? The demon was completely baffled. 2 attacks, 2 effortless dodges. He leapt back, putting distance between himself and the brothers just as Tanjiro's retaliatory axe swing sliced through the air where he'd been. Narrator's note. Zetsu is the Nen technique of shutting off one's aura flow, effectively erasing one's presence. Inspired by the water walking exercise from Zig's notes, Roy had an idea. By imagining his Nen not as a platform, but as a thin, flexible film, he could use it to manually seal his own aura nodes. It wasn't true Zetsu, but it cut off the outward flow of his aura and, by extension, his scent. It was a brilliant, if imperfect, improvisation. Bro, I can barely smell you either, Tanjiro whispered, his own super-sensitive nose picking up on the strangeness. He stepped back beside Roy, sniffing the air. No, there's still a scent, but it's very, very faint. As expected of the boy with a nose like a bloodhound. He was right, Roy hadn't truly mastered Zetsu. He wasn't like Gon, who had grown up in nature and learned to suppress his presence instinctively. This was a crude imitation, a thin membrane of aura clinging to his skin. It wasn't a perfect seal, and it still leaked a trace amount of his presence, a trace easily masked by the overwhelming stench of blood in the shrine. Is this really the time to be distracted? Roy's voice was sharp. Two flames of Nen ignited in his pupils as he activated Gyo, seeing the demon launch another attack. To your right. He grabbed Tanjiro's shoulder and pulled. As Tanjiro was yanked aside, he swung his axe on pure instinct, a wide, horizontal arc of steel. Slash. The blade tore through the night, slicing deep into the demon's abdomen. Blood and entrails spilled onto the floor. Dohihara shrieked and leapt back again, his eyes blazing with pure hatred for Roy. Damn it, I'll never get to him with this other one in the way. Do I have to abandon my temple? He had heard that the great master, Muzan, had his own magnificent domain, the Infinite Castle. This shrine was Dohihara's temple, his dining hall, the foundation of his existence. He would not give it up. Which meant there was only one path left. This is why humans are such disgusting creatures, Dohihara snarled, his wounds already beginning to heal. Always using the weak as shields. I was an honest man once, you know. Until my boss made a mistake and framed me for it. So I ate him. He pointed a bloody finger at Roy, his voice dripping with scorn. And you, hiding behind your little brother. Are you a coward? Don't you dare face me one-on-one. Is bro being called a coward? Tanjiro thought, stealing a glance at him. By a demon. Roy's expression was unreadable, he remained completely unmoved by the taunt. As long as the system panel didn't tell him this fight would increase his combat experience, he had absolutely no reason to get involved. Besides, friend, Roy said, his voice calm and serious. You shouldn't judge a book by its cover. He may look like an idiot, but in my eyes, my brother is very strong. Bro. A fire ignited in Tanjiro's soul. He raised his axe, two jets of steam blasting from his nostrils. Chapter 21. The Head Pilar's debut XA world that eats people. This is the first time bro has ever praised you. Tanjiro, you have to prove him right. A fire, hotter than any coal he'd ever mined, ignited in Tanjiro's chest. Dohihara's taunt had failed. Seething with frustration, the demon let out a vicious snarl. Fine, then I'll snap his neck and rip out his heart right in front of you. Since he couldn't get around the obstacle, he would simply smash through it. He swore he would make the arrogant human pay for underestimating him. Whoosh! Dohihara exploded from his position, launching himself at Tanjiro. Roy remained leaning against the shrine's pillar, his hands stuffed in his pockets. His eyes, glowing faintly with Gyo, tracked the demon's every move. Left, he said, his voice calm. Tanjiro didn't hesitate. He swung the axe in a powerful upward arc, tearing open Dohihara's chest from hip to shoulder. A spike of agony shot through the demon's mind, but he was a survivor. He knew that if he retreated now, the boy in the back would just keep calling out his attack patterns, and he'd be cut to pieces eventually. So he pressed the attack. Ignoring the grievous wound, Dohihara activated his ability. His chest muscles, already regenerating, clamped down on the axe blade, trapping it. Then, with a vicious snarl, he whipped his head forward. His hair shot out, instantly growing and twisting into thick, rope-like tendrils that wrapped around Tanjiro's neck. Watch the hair, Roy called out, a fraction of a second too late. He could see it clearly. This wasn't a blood demon art. It was just a clever, high-speed application of a demon's natural regenerative ability. Anyone unfamiliar with demons would be caught completely off guard. Bro, you told me too late, Tanjiro choked out, already tangled in the living hair. His face, still soft with a bit of baby fat, began to turn a dusky purple. He blinked frantically at Roy, his legs kicking uselessly at the demon's chest. But Dohihara's body, fueled by demon blood, was like a stone wall. The wound from the axe was already steaming, sealing itself shut. Ha ha ha, feel the pain, human. Dohihara cackled, lifting Tanjiro into the air by his neck. He shot a triumphant, bloody grin at Roy. I told you I'd make you pay for looking down on me. Ghhk. Tanjiro clawed at the hair, his lungs burning. This time, his pride wouldn't let him scream for help again. Stubborn as a mule, Roy thought, shaking his head. He didn't move from his spot, his voice laced with a cold, practical disappointment. Are your hands and feet the only weapons you have? Is your head just for decoration? Bite him, headbutt him. The words were like a lightning strike in Tanjiro's oxygen-starved brain. That's right, I still have my head. And then, the future legend of the Iron Head finally remembered his most famous and loyal weapon. Just as he had in so many battles to come, he lowered his chin and slammed his forehead forward. Crack! The sound of fracturing bone echoed through the shrine. Dohihara's eyes rolled back in their sockets, his consciousness short-circuiting from the unexpected, concussive force. He went limp, his body crashing to the ground. The hair went slack. Tanjiro fell, gasping, but his instincts took over. He grabbed the axe, scrambled to his feet, and with a final, desperate yell, brought the blade down. The demon's head went rolling across the floor. Tanjiro collapsed, the axe slipping from his numb fingers. He sat there, chest heaving, and turned to Roy, a bloody, triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Bro," he panted, "it's finished." He had finally done it. He was no longer the coward hiding behind a tree. But to pop the champagne cork too soon is a mistake as old as fighting itself. A shadow fell over him. The headless body of Dohihara staggered back to its feet, looming over him. Tanjiro's blood ran cold. A pair of sharp, clawed hands reached for his face. "Normal blades can't kill them." Roy's words from the blacksmith's shop came flooding back. Just cutting off the head wasn't enough. "And this is why you always confirm the kill." A blur of motion. In a flash of shadow step, Roy appeared beside the headless corpse. Before Tanjiro could even blink, Roy's hand, glowing with the dark light of Snake Awakens, plunged into the demon's chest and ripped out its heart. The organ was still beating in his palm. The sun-patterned earring swayed as Roy looked down at his stunned brother. "This is what you call finished." "Sorry," Tanjiro mumbled, his face turning a shade of red that would make a monkey's behind jealous. Roy snorted. He clenched his fist, and the heart dissolved into a shower of black ash. "If all you can do is apologize," he said, his voice cold, "then you can stop following me." The headless body finally crashed to the ground. But the surprise attack had bought the demon's head a few precious seconds. It had already sprouted two new, spindly arms and was scrabbling away into the darkness. "That kid is too much. He has to be a pillar. Only a pillar could be that strong." The demon scrambled for its life. But just as it reached the tree line, it heard a sound behind it. It glanced back. Tanjiro was there. He swung the axe, pinning the demon's newly grown arms to the trunk of a tree. He stood over the head, panting, his mind racing. That demon was so cunning, it ran even without a body. Bro was right, I got careless. He picked up a heavy rock, his face a mask of shame and determination. He knew Roy was watching. He raised the rock over his head, but his hands trembled, hesitating. The demon, Dohihara, looked up at him, its face no longer a mask of rage, but of tragic despair. "You think anyone chooses to become a demon?" It screamed, its voice cracking. "I was a good man. I had a life, but this damned world forced my hand. My boss poisoned a customer with undercooked beans and framed me for it. He bribed the officials, and when I was already in jail, he paid the guards to kill me. So tell me," it shrieked, tears of blood streaming from its eyes. "What was I supposed to do? Because I was an honest man, I deserved to die." Chapter 22. A Brother's Quarrel X. The first appearance of Nen after death. "You talk too much." Squelch. Roy appeared in a flash, his hand chopping through the air and plunging into the back of Dohihara's head, silencing the demon's pathetic monologue for good. He shook his hand clean, letting the gray matter splatter onto the snow. He turned, his eyes cold and hard as he stared at Tanjiro. "Do you have any idea what you were just doing?" "I know. You know. Then why did you hesitate?" I don't know," Tanjiro stammered, unable to meet his brother's gaze. Roy moved. In an instant, he had retrieved Tanjiro's axe from the tree and pressed the cold steel against his brother's neck. The razor-sharp edge rested directly over his carotid artery. "You don't know. Good." A humorless, angry smile twisted Roy's lips. "In that case, rather than watch you get eaten by the next demon you meet, I think it's better if I just kill you now. At least this way, I can leave you a whole corpse." Sympathy for a demon? Who the hell do you think you are? In the original story, Tanjiro's hesitation had nearly cost him his chance with Urokodaki. Now, Roy was beginning to think that the demon Dohihara had been right about one thing. A damn bleeding heart like you deserves to have a knife at his throat. He seemed so pitiful. Was the man in the shrine, the one with his guts ripped out, pitiful? Roy's voice was a low snarl. What about all the other people he's eaten over the years? Were they pitiful? His anger boiled over. He spun the axe in his hand, and with a powerful, open-palmed motion, backhanded Tanjiro across the face with the flat of the blade. Bam! The blow sent Tanjiro flying 10 meters, his body crashing into a tree before slumping to the ground. Remember this, Roy's voice was ice. If there's a next time, and the demon doesn't kill you, I will. He slid the axe back into his belt, shouldered his basket, and walked back into the shrine, his figure framed by the warm, orange glow of the single oil lamp within. Tanjiro sat slumped against the tree, his right cheek already swelling to the size of a melon. He didn't feel the pain. He just stared, his eyes vacant, at his brothers retreating back. His father had always taught him to be kind, to help those in need. But tonight, he had shown kindness in the wrong place. A demon was a demon. A human was a human. A predator that sympathizes with its prey is already dead. The last remnants of Dohihara's body dissolved into ash. The snow began to fall faster, harder. After a long time, sensation returned to Tanjiro in a wave of fire, his cheek throbbing with a deep, aching pain. He was lucky. Thanks to years of Zoldyck conditioning, Roy knew exactly how to inflict pain without causing permanent injury. Tanjiro staggered to his feet and knelt in the snow, facing the shrine. I was wrong, he cried out, his voice thick with shame. He was still young, his worldview still malleable. If he had been an adult, Roy would have killed him without a second thought rather than risk being dragged down by his weakness. Roy snorted from inside the shrine, not even bothering to look. Am I supposed to come out and carry you? Get in here. A wave of relief washed over Tanjiro. He scrambled inside and saw Roy starting to clean up the blood and gore with a broom. Let me, bro, he said, taking the broom. You go rest. I promise, I'll get this place spotless. There won't be a single trace of blood left. Roy trusted Tanjiro's dog nose. He let him have it. A few minutes later, Tanjiro went to move the broken statue. And then he saw it. Behind the altar was a pile of human bones, stacked nearly to the ceiling. He finally, truly understood why Roy hadn't given the demon a shred of mercy. Every last one of these creatures deserved to die. And I actually believed that things lies. Tanjiro's face was pale with sickness and self-loathing. If he could, he would go back in time and slap himself for his own naive stupidity. Roy had already seen the bone pile with Gyo. He said nothing, a shadow falling over his heart. The Zoldicks were killers. His grandfather killed someone every single day. But their kills were clean, professional, painless. They were assassinations, not torturous feasts. He couldn't begin to imagine the horror these people had felt, being eaten alive. He walked past his basket, took out his hand axe, and went back outside. His father had told him the blade was getting dull, now it would have a different use. Tanjiro, seeing the axe, understood. He grabbed the oil lamp and followed. They found a clear patch of ground behind the shrine and, working together in the falling snow, they dug a large grave. They brought the bones out from the shrine and laid them to rest. The snow was coming down in thick, heavy flakes. Tanjiro stood over the grave, the lamplight casting a warm glow on his face. May the god of fire watch over these poor souls, he murmured. May they find peace, and be reborn into a better life. When the last of the dirt was piled on, he turned to Roy. Bro, he asked tentatively. Should we go inside now? Roy stood leaning on his axe, his gaze fixed on the freshly made grave. Unseen by Tanjiro, a milky white film of Nen coated his eyes. An orb of pure white energy, like a will-o'-the-wisp, floated up from the grave mound. Roy bowed his head slightly. I apologize for meeting you under these circumstances, he said, his voice respectful. My name is Eiichiro Kamado. May I ask your name? A faint, ghostly wind stirred the snow. My humble name is Hiro Minamino, a voice whispered, audible only to Roy. I am from the village of Uchida, at the foot of Sagiri Mountain. Thank you, Master Eiichiro, for avenging me. The wind swirled, and a flurry of snow hit Tanjiro's face. He rubbed his eyes, confused. Roy touched his brother's forehead. He channeled a thin, controlled stream of his own aura into Tanjiro's eyes. And then Tanjiro saw it. Standing right beside him was a faint, translucent figure. It was prostrating itself before Roy, its forehead pressed to the snowy ground in the deepest bow of gratitude. That's the man from the shrine. Tanjiro gasped. The demon. It was him, the merchant, and in that moment, for the first time in his new life, Roy was witnessing the phenomenon known only to the most powerful and obsessed. Nen after death. Chapter 23. Minamino's last wish x Nen property transformation. Narrator's note. Nen after death. As the name implies, it is a hatsu that only activates after the user's death. This phenomenon is born from an incredibly powerful, lingering emotion or an unbreakable vow. Examples are numerous and terrifying. The Kakin Prince Camilla's million round-trip cat, which revives her by stealing the life of her killer. Neferpito's toy repairer, which reanimated its own corpse to continue attacking Gon even after death, and Krollo's stolen ability, Sun and Moon. Hisoka's own post-mortem revival is another famous case. Nen after death is characterized by its intense, obsessive nature, fueled by an overwhelming willpower that transcends the boundary of life itself. But the spirit before him was clearly not that. First, Hiro Minamino was an ordinary merchant, not a Nen user. Second, this was the world of Demon Slayer, a construct of Roy's own cognition. Without Roy's influence, it was impossible for a native of this world to manifest Nen. Which left only one possibility. This was a remnant soul. A lingering echo of a person's consciousness, a non-physical manifestation of their spirit. When Tanjiro reached out to help the spirit up, his hands passed right through it, confirming Roy's theory. He's another kind of ghost, Tanjiro thought, his mind struggling to categorize this gentle spirit after his encounters with the monstrous demons. Hiro Minamino, however, seemed to have come to terms with his state. Or perhaps, as a traveling merchant, he had simply learned how to talk to anyone, or anything. Please don't worry, benefactor, he said with a kind smile. To be able to see this world one last time after my unfortunate end. I am already blessed. As he spoke, his translucent form flickered, thinned by the cold wind. Bro, he's fading, Tanjiro cried out, his heart aching at the thought of witnessing another life extinguish before his eyes. Roy said nothing. He coated his right hand in a thin layer of aura and reached out, mimicking Tanjiro's earlier gesture. To both Tanjiro's and Minamino's astonishment, Roy's hand made contact. He was able to grip the spirit's arm and help him to his feet. For a brief moment, it was as if the ghost had a solid, physical form. Thank you, benefactor, Minamino said, bowing again. I feel much better now. And it was true. Bro, he's more solid, Tanjiro said, circling the spirit with wide, curious eyes. Roy didn't respond. He could feel his aura being steadily drained. Minamino's continued existence was being powered by Roy's Nen. The moment he cut off the supply, the spirit would dissipate. Ultimately, Nen was a product of the mind, body, and spirit, filtered through the 6 major types. It was a reflection of one's emotion, willpower, and personality. In short, it was the power to impose your will on reality, governed by raw aura quantity and the rules you set for it. Is it because of Nen that I can touch a soul? As the thought crossed Roy's mind, the system panel flashed. Below the entry for Nen-shaped transformation, a new category had appeared. Nen property transformation. Roy blinked. Is this a reward for killing the demon? He remembered the book from his great-grandfather had mentioned property transformation, but it hadn't included any training methods. Perhaps Maha had felt it was too soon for him to delve into such an advanced topic. But Maha couldn't have known about his Hatsu, the gate of cognition. From his very first dream, Roy had been engaged in an intensive, practical application of his own Nen. Should I ask him for the second half of the notes when I get back? After a moment's thought, he decided against it. One step at a time. For now, his priorities were increasing his base aura quantity and mastering total concentration breathing. Roy pushed the thoughts aside and addressed the spirit directly. Don't thank me yet, he said, his tone practical, not cruel. You are still going to disappear. Minamino was not a Nen user, and his body was gone. There was no coming back from this. As I said, to see the world one last time is a blessing, Minamino repeated with a peaceful smile. But once you're gone forever. Tanjiro blurted out, unable to comprehend the man's acceptance. Quiet, Roy snapped, before turning back to the spirit, a hint of admiration in his voice. You are a remarkably optimistic man. If you have any unfinished business, speak now. If it is within our power, my brother and I will see it done. That's right, I can help too, Tanjiro added, before quickly covering his mouth and stealing a nervous glance at Roy. This time, Roy let it slide. There is one thing, Minamino said, his gaze turning towards the distant, snow-covered peak of Sagiri Mountain. He knelt once more in the snow before Roy. Please, benefactor, allow me to see my daughter, one last time. That is all I ask. How old is she? A year and a half. Does she know how to say, Dada? A look of pure, unadulterated joy lit up the spirit's face. She does, he said, his voice thick with love. She knows how to walk, too. Every time I come home, she crawls onto my stomach and just babbles, Dada, Dada, over and over, smearing drool all over my face. His voice became a soft, wistful stream of memories. I was thinking, when she gets a little older, I would tie pretty ribbons in her hair, take her to the capital to see the sights, to try the famous sweet dumplings. We'd go to the fancy dress shops, and I'd buy her a beautiful new dress, just to watch her twirl in front of the mirror. He spoke on, as if he had a lifetime of words to say and only a few moments left to say them. Roy listened in silence. Beside him, Tanjiro was openly weeping, tears streaming down his face. This damned world. Dohihara's dying words suddenly echoed in Tanjiro's mind. The boy unconsciously gripped the handle of the axe at his belt. The moonlight caught the steel blade, reflecting a cold, unforgiving light. Chapter 24. 1,000 Faces X Illumi's Gaze. Hiro Minamino finally fell silent. He let out a long, regretful sigh, and the lines on his face seemed to deepen. Humans are emotional creatures. Who, in such a situation, could truly find peace? In his small, warm home, not only was his daughter waiting for him, but so were his wife, his mother, and a whole network of family and friends. Now, he was nothing more than a lost soul, a ghost clinging to the kindness of strangers. You are both fortunate and unfortunate, Roy said after a long silence. He reached out and helped the spirit to his feet. I accept your request. He then turned to his brother. Tanjiro, give me your water flask. Okay. Tanjiro didn't know what his brother was planning, but he obeyed without question, ducking back into the shrine to retrieve it. Roy held the spirit's hand, his nen wrapping around the remnant soul in a protective shroud, and followed him inside. He stepped over the high threshold and closed the heavy wooden doors, shutting out the wind and snow. The shrine, now cleaned of its gruesome stains, felt almost welcoming. They broke apart some of the rotten floorboards for firewood, and soon a cheerful blaze warmed the small space. Tanjiro returned with the flask. Roy unscrewed the cap, took out his own, and poured its contents into Tanjiro's, leaving his own empty. Forgive the humble accommodations, he said to Minamino. But for tonight, this will have to be your vessel. At dawn, we will take you to your family. Thank you, Master Eiichiro, the spirit said, bowing deeply. He dissolved into a wisp of light and, guided by Roy's nen, flowed into the empty flask. With a soft pop, Roy sealed the cap. It's no trouble, Roy said to the flask. We were heading to Sagiri Mountain anyway. This is on the way. The flask vibrated slightly, as if in response. Tanjiro peered at it, his eyes wide with wonder. He had never seen a person, or a ghost, stored in a bottle before. Bro, can you really put people in there? Not people, ghosts, Roy replied, gently pushing Tanjiro's curious hands away. He tucked the flask safely inside his GI, maintaining a thin, steady flow of nen to sustain the spirit within. The question, however, did bring to mind one of the 12 Kazuki from the story, Yoko, the upper rank 5, who could shrink himself down to live inside a pot. Oh, Tanjiro said, visibly disappointed. I thought maybe you could put me in there. Then I could be with you all the time. Roy just rolled his eyes and tossed 2 rice balls at his brother's head. Does this idiot think it's some kind of magic gourd? That I can just call his name and suck him inside? The night deepened, the blizzard outside showing no signs of stopping. The brothers ate their simple meal by the fire. Their blankets were the cloths Kai had used to line the charcoal baskets, a good shake was all it took to make them serviceable. Tanjiro lay down beside Roy, staring into the dancing flames. Hey, bro, is the world always this cruel? The woodcutter, the merchant, in the past 2 days, Tanjiro had seen more death than in his entire life. He couldn't sleep. He turned to look at Roy, his eyes wide and searching in the firelight. Roy simply closed his own eyes, feigning sleep. The world has 1,000 different faces. To some, it is hell. To Muzan and his demons, it was a paradise, a grand buffet of endless food. There was no single answer he could give. Tanjiro huffed in annoyance at being ignored and rolled over, turning his back to his brother. Roy let him be, cleared his mind, and fell into the dream. The familiar sensation of falling. He opened his eyes to his bedroom in the Zoldyck estate. The night had been both long and short. The clock in the corner chimed 4 in the morning. Time for his run. The air was thick and hot. Roy pulled on his running gear and set off, the lush, tropical scenery of Kukuru Mountain a stark contrast to the snow-covered world he had just left. As he ran past the butler's villa, he saw lights on, the smell of baking bread already in the air. 1 kilometer, 2, my pace is faster than usual. Thanks to the breathing style and his improved shadow step, he could feel the difference. A quick glance at his system panel confirmed it. Physique, 10.05 to 10.55. It wasn't a massive leap, but it was progress. He had finally broken his plateau. A small, satisfied smile touched his lips. He reached the security station at the base of the mountain. "Morning, young master," said Zebro. He was younger here, his hair still present, though his receding hairline was already plotting a course for baldness. He tipped his hat to Roy. Roy smiled back. Just as he was about to turn and head back up the mountain, a thunderous boom echoed from the main gate. The testing gate, the symbol of the Zoldyck family's absolute power. The first 3 of its 7 doors had been pushed open. The first door alone weighed 2 tons, with each subsequent door doubling in weight. Pushing open 3 doors required a staggering 14 tons of force. "Welcome home, young Master Illumi." Zebro, who had just put his hat back on, quickly took it off again. He looked surprised to see both the young masters at the same time, at this hour. Boom, the massive gates swung shut. Illumi walked through, ignoring Zebro completely. His black, empty eyes locked onto Roy. "Just thought you should know," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I've had my Nen awakened, too." Chapter 25. Illumi's defeat X Silva's definition. Roy could feel it instantly. A damp, cold aura clung to Illumi, unsettling and dangerous. It felt like a viper lurking in a dark, wet sewer, its tongue flicking, ready to strike at any moment. "Congratulations," Roy said without breaking his stride, and continued his run back up the mountain. Illumi watched him go in silence, his figure half hidden in the shadows cast by the security station's dim light. He stood motionless until Roy's back had completely disappeared from view, then he began to follow, his face a perfect, emotionless mask. "Congratulations." He hadn't sensed a trace of sincerity in Roy's aura. A Nen user's aura is not a constant, milky white energy. Its color shifts with their emotional state. Anger manifests as a burning red. Malice and killing intent appear as a deep, abyssal black. A calm, balanced state is a tranquil green. But an emotional state of pure detachment, neither liking nor disliking, neither caring nor surprised, a state of habitual, distant observation, manifests as a refined, cool gray. And gray was the color Illumi saw shrouding his brother. It meant that in Roy's mind, he was nothing more than a familiar stranger, someone to be kept at arm's length. Illumi's assessment was correct. The news of his awakening had caused no ripples in Roy's mind. It was as interesting to him as a weather report. The only thing of note was how quickly Illumi had learned to contain his aura. It meant that, like him, Illumi had mastered the basics of Ten within moments of his initiation. Narrator's note. Ten is the art of keeping one's aura nodes open while allowing aura to flow around the body in a protective shroud. It is the most fundamental of the 4 major principles of Nen. Zig's notes mentioned that mastering Ten was a good measure of raw talent. Zushi, a normal prodigy, took 3 months. Gon and Kahlua, 1 in a million talents, took mere minutes. Prince Saridnik of the Kakan Empire, a once in a billion genius, mastered it in a single second. For Roy and Illumi, benefiting from the Zoldyck bloodline, mastering it almost instantly was not particularly surprising. The grandfather clock chimed 4:30 a.m. Roy, having finished his run and a quick shower, sat down at the dining table on schedule. Goto arrived with the breakfast cart. The usual, a beef burger, a side salad, and a tall glass of milk. The only new addition was a small plate of eggplant with minced meat. The head chef observed the young master in the kitchen the other day, Goto explained, noticing Roy's gaze. He attempted to replicate the dish and humbly asks for your critique. If you find it unsatisfactory, I will have him dismissed. Roy was already numb to the casual way the Zoldyck staff treated life and employment. He picked up his chopsticks, intending to give the dish a passing grade to save the chef's job. But before he could, a familiar, ghostly wind swept into the room. Maha Zoldyck was there. He plucked a piece of eggplant from the plate and popped it in his mouth. Too salty, the ancient assassin mumbled, his eyes closed. The sweetness is overpowering, and the eggplant isn't soft enough. Needs more work. He opened his eyes, dropped the chopsticks, and vanished. Roy and Goto stared at each other, speechless. The old man moved with such impossible speed, it was as if he'd just popped in to use the restroom. Quote. You heard him, Roy said, breaking the silence. Too much salt and sugar, the eggplant wasn't prepared properly, and it needed to be simmered on low heat to soften before finishing. Very good, young master. I will have him dismissed immediately. Quote. Roy shot him an exasperated look. Is firing people your only solution? His replacement probably won't be any better. I'll write down the recipe for him. And tell someone to buy a proper cast iron wok for the kitchen. That's an order. As you wish, Godo said with a bow. As he served Roy, he began his daily report of family happenings. The mistress was quite ill the other day. She believed she was with child, but a quick NEN scan revealed it was merely food poisoning. The butler in charge of procuring vegetables was disciplined and then sent to Meteor City. Roy knew his mother, Kikyo, was from Meteor City. He took a bite of his burger, offering no comment. She was truly obsessed with having Kahlua. Also, Godo continued, adjusting his glasses. Young Master Illumi's 80-win streak at Heaven's Arena has been broken. The burger was a bit rare, but Roy chewed impassively. His opponent was an emitter who had apparently studied his matches and came down from a higher floor specifically to challenge him. The fight lasted nearly an hour before young Master Illumi was knocked from the ring by a precisely aimed NEN bullet. Godo watched Roy's face carefully. The young master has not competed at Heaven's Arena for some time. It is believed that young Master Illumi was attempting to break your own record of 81 consecutive wins. After having his NEN awakened yesterday, I hear he plans to seek out that emitter for a rematch. He doesn't want a rematch, Roy thought. He wants a kill. He finished the burger and wiped his mouth with a napkin. Enough gossip. What's my training schedule for today? Snow Walker, resting on its rack, seemed to hum with a restless energy, mirroring his own desire to return to the dream world and find Eroking. He stood up, leaving the dishes for Godo. Actually, young master, the butler said, your morning training has been cancelled. The master has scheduled a session to determine both your and young Master Illumi's NEN types. He wishes to plan your future training accordingly. So, he's finally remembered he has another son. Roy picked up Snow Walker and walked towards the door. I won't be attending, he said, not bothering to look back. If my father asks why, you can tell him this. He was the one who taught me that a true assassin never shows his hand. Not to anyone. Chapter 26. A stubborn father, a stubborn son. The little bird's wings have gotten strong. In the dimly lit bedroom, Maha chuckled, his eyes glued to the cartoon playing on his small screen. For a split second, his ears seemed to stretch and grow to an impossible size, then shrink back just as quickly. On the screen, a cartoon father and son were having a screaming match over a toy, the argument escalating until the father reached for his belt. Creak. The door opened, and Zeno, his white hair a stark contrast to the shadows, pushed a small dining cart into the room. You seem to be in a good mood today, grandfather. He brought the cart to a stop and lifted the silver cloche. Alongside the usual beef bourguignon and a soup with torn bread, there was a small, fragrant plate of eggplant with minced meat. The kitchen staff developed a new recipe, based on something that Boy Roy made, Zeno explained. Since you enjoyed it so much, I brought you a plate. He had tried it himself in the kitchen, the flavor was complex and delicious, unlike anything he'd ever tasted. Well, look at me, Maha rasped, not opening his eyes. Getting a personal delivery from a busy man like you. How important I must be. Zeno didn't react to the sarcasm. He ladled out a bowl of soup, methodically tearing the bread into it. He moved behind the rocking chair and began to massage his grandfather's frail shoulders. Kikyo was poisoned, he said, his voice low. It was one of the new butlers. Silva investigated. The man's background is clean, no grudge against the family. It was a complete accident. He paused, his long, slender fingers working the knots in Maha's back. As you know, grandfather, our family doesn't fear targeted attacks. What we fear are coincidences. Maha grunted in contentment as Zeno's massage hit a particularly sore spot. You're still worried about the curse, aren't you? He said, his voice a dry whisper. If it's coming, it's coming. Worrying is a waste of energy. Your wisdom is profound, grandfather. I'm not being wise. I'm just telling you that seeing your worried face annoys me. Does seeing Roy's face annoy you? He's my pride and joy. How can you compare? I'm your grandson, too. You. The old man tilted his chin towards the door. Get out. And so, Zeno was once again ejected. Grandfather is still grandfather, he thought, a faint smile on his lips. That was all he needed to know. He stood outside the door for a moment, then, with his hands clasped behind his back, he began to walk down the ancient corridor, his steps leading him, as if by instinct, towards Roy's room. Roy had just finished speaking with Godo and was heading out, snowwalker in hand. As he rounded a corner, he came face to face with his grandfather. He immediately bowed his head. Grandfather. The morning sun caught in the boy's dark hair, making it shine. For a fleeting moment, Zeno was transported back in time, to his own youth. HMPH, he grunted, his eyes scanning Roy from head to toe, lingering for a fraction of a second on the white-sheathed katana. He then walked past him without another word. That's a fine blade, Zeno's voice drifted back down the hall. A shame its previous owner was a fool. He offered me 100 million jenny to kill his master. I decided killing him was better value. I hope it has found a better master this time. With a flicker of movement, Zeno was gone. Roy stood there for a moment, the sun warming the back of his neck. Then he turned and walked in the opposite direction, towards the training hall. Luke, the butler in charge of electroshock training, was already waiting. Seeing Roy enter, he swapped the 500,000-volt prod in his hand for the 1 million-volt model. The master has ordered that the young master's training intensity be doubled, starting today, Luke said, bowing respectfully. Roy looked at him, his face impassive. I was told my morning training was cancelled. Godo had just said so. Luke had to know. Only young Master Illumi's training was cancelled, sir. Yours is to proceed. Roy stared at the butler for a long moment. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he sensed a presence. He whipped his head towards the window. Silva was standing there, watching him. His massive frame was a dark silhouette against the rising sun, blocking out the light. And in that instant, Roy understood. His father had overheard his conversation with Godo. This was his punishment. Roy met his father's gaze without flinching. For a moment, the air between them seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. Luke, caught in the middle, remained frozen in his bow, barely daring to breathe. Finally, Silva spoke, his voice a low rumble. What did you call me? Father. That's not what you called me this morning. As you said, that was this morning, Roy replied, taking a slow breath. This is now. There was a long, heavy silence. Shock him, Silva said. Luke straightened up, a quiet, my apologies, on his lips. He pressed the prod against Roy's chest. 1 million volts of electricity surged through him. The world exploded into white-hot pain. His muscles spasmed, his body twitching violently, but he locked his knees, refusing to fall, his eyes still fixed on his father's silhouette. He held the gaze until his world went black. 9 in the morning. Roy slowly came to. So, being electrocuted into unconsciousness doesn't trigger the deep sleep mode, he noted clinically. He was still on the floor of the training hall, not in the shrine. How long was I out? He rasped, his throat dry, as Luke helped him sip some water. 30 minutes and 3 seconds, young master. He looked towards the window. The sun was higher now, its heat baking the stone floor. Silva was gone. Roy tried to push himself up, but his limbs wouldn't obey. He staggered a few steps and collapsed back onto the floor. Young master, please be careful not to crush young Master Illumi, Luke said, rushing to his side. Roy looked down. His rear end was cushioned by something soft. Lying on the floor beneath him, his long, straight hair now a frizzy, electrified mess, was Illumi. What is he doing here? After young Master Illumi completed his Nen-type test, he came directly to the training hall, Luke explained. When he heard your training had been intensified, he insisted on receiving the same. I had no choice but to comply. And, well, you see the result. Chapter 27, Instant Takedown X Silva's Test. Roy didn't spare Illumi a second glance. Even unconscious, his brother's dead fish eyes were wide open, radiating a stubborn defiance. I, Illumi Zoldyck, have never been second best. Roy could practically hear the thought that must have gone through his head when he demanded the stronger prod. He sat on his brother's chest for a moment, then gestured for Luke to dig a hole in the courtyard. They dragged Illumi outside and unceremoniously dumped him in. Young master, is this wise? Luke asked, his voice trembling as he watched Roy start shoveling dirt onto his brother. He was terrified of what Illumi would do to him once he woke up. Roy leaned on the shovel, gradually regaining control of his aching body. He left Illumi buried up to his neck. Don't worry, he said casually. He prefers to sleep this way. Luke didn't believe him, but as Roy patted down the last of the dirt, he noticed that Illumi's perpetually open eyes had finally closed. Get me an umbrella, Illumi's flat voice instructed from the ground. The sun is in my eyes. He would have preferred the dark, cool hole in his own room, but his body was still paralyzed. This would have to do. Yes, young master. Luke scurried off, not daring to look back. Roy shielded his eyes with a hand and stuck the shovel in the ground. Rest well, he said, and walked back to the training hall. Illumi's eyes opened again, watching his brothers retreating back. Just before Roy disappeared around a corner, his voice followed, quiet but firm. Next time, I'll wake up before you. Boom. The heavy doors of the training hall slammed shut. I hope so, Roy murmured to himself. He picked up Snow Walker and drew the blade. He didn't immediately begin practicing sun breathing. Instead, he stood in the center of the room, calming the lingering agitation in his spirit. He took a deep, centering breath, then moved, the blade cutting a diagonal arc through the air. Sun breathing, first form, dance. A wave of heat rolled off the blade, and a flicker of flame erupted from its edge, leaving a scorched black line on the stone wall. Not focused enough. His wrist snapped, and the blade reversed its arc, an upward slash that carved a second ring of fire in the air. Still not focused. Third form, raging sun. Fourth form, setting sun transformation. Fifth form, solar heat haze. He moved through the forms, one after another, tirelessly chasing that elusive feeling of perfect concentration. When Godo came to call him for lunch, he sent him away. Are you an enhancer? Illumi was awake. He had dug himself out of the hole and was now leaning against the training hall window, watching Roy. He had apparently slept the entire day away. Sleeping under an umbrella in the garden isn't so bad, he thought, and walked into the room. I think you need a sparring partner. He flexed his fingers, his hands stiffening into blades. The Nen awakening had clearly given him a surge of confidence. But in the next second, a black shadow blurred. Roy grabbed him by his frizzy, electrified hair and slammed his face into the floor. I'm hungry, Roy said, his voice flat. I don't have time to play with you. He sheathed Snow Walker, stepped over Illumi's prone body, and walked out. Illumi lay there, staring at the ceiling, his mind a complete blank. A moment later, Silva appeared. Illumi slowly pushed himself up. He's an enhancer, isn't he? Narrator's note. Enhancers specialize in strengthening themselves or their weapons. Their Hatsu are typically focused on increasing their own attack and defense capabilities. The most famous enhancer is Isaac Netero, the strongest human alive. I don't know, Silva replied, moving to the center of the room and beginning his stretches. He has to be, Illumi insisted, getting to his feet. There was no other way to explain the explosive, impossible speed Roy had just displayed. He didn't use Nen on you, Silva said, glancing at the corner of the room. The old surveillance camera had been replaced with a new one, this one encased in a thick, steel box. Then what was it? Shadow step. Illumi froze, his body going rigid. He stood there for a long time, then walked to the window, hoisted himself up, and dropped back down into the courtyard. Silva watched as his son found the hole he'd been buried in, jumped back in, and began to robotically pull the dirt back over himself, as if only the embrace of the earth could offer him any comfort. Weak. You're too weak, Illumi. Though they were separated by a long corridor, the same thought echoed in both brothers' minds. Roy, meanwhile, was walking back to his room. A system notification popped up. Physique plus 0.05. He glanced at his stats. Shadow step. Proficient 89/100ths. He was close to reaching the next level of mastery. It must be because my base physique has improved, he reasoned. He couldn't wait to go to sleep and continue his training. But he knew a harsh night of training likely awaited him. He decided to eat and take a medicinal bath first. He found that Godo, with the intuition of a long-serving butler, had already prepared the bath. As Roy soaked in the steaming, herb-infused water, Godo stood by, pouring hot water over his back and giving his report. Quote. The master was informed of your refusal to attend the Nen-type test. He said nothing, but he has issued a new directive. And what's that? In 2 weeks' time, he will test the results of your training. What? Training? Godo polished his fogged glasses, his expression grim. Your mastery of Zetsu, he said. The master said that if you can withstand 3 lashes of his whip, you will have passed. Roy stiffened. The memory of the 1,000,000-volt prod seared through him, and his chest began to ache all over again. Chapter 28. Off to Sagiri Mountain X. Minamino's gratitude. An electric shock's intensity can be controlled. Silva's whip, however, was an entirely different beast. How much force he would use, whether he would imbue it with Nen, it was all a complete unknown. Whatever makes him happy, Roy said, a note of resignation in his voice. They were all stubborn, him and his father. Neither would ever back down. That was the Zoldyck way, a house full of immovable objects. Godo, ever the professional, said nothing more. His job was to handle the logistics, to free the young master from the burden of trivialities. Ding! The clock in the corner chimed, signaling less than an hour until Roy's scheduled sleep time. After helping Roy out of the medicinal bath, Godo gathered the used clothes and was about to leave when Roy stopped him. 2 things. First, I need you to book appointments with the top specialists in pulmonary disease. Second, I need you to find me all available information on conjurer-type Nen users. Specifically, any with a documented record of using reverse conjuration. I need to consult with them. He hadn't forgotten about Tanjiro. The most direct solution he could think of was to use a conjuration ability to bring modern medicine from his world into the world of Demon Slayer. He instinctively reached up to touch the sun-patterned earring, but his hand found nothing. Right, he wasn't in the dream yet. The first task is simple, Godo said after a moment's thought. The capital city's hospital is world-renowned for its respiratory department. With enough Jenny, we can secure an appointment with the best. As for the second, Godo spread his hands helplessly. Young master, as you know, I do not have the clearance to access the family's intelligence network. Roy knew the Zoldicks had their own private intelligence agency. But without Silva's direct authorization, not even he or Illumi could use it. I understand, Roy said, dismissing him. He had time. Nearly 2 years before Tanjiro's health would critically decline. He'd find a way. If all else failed, once he'd mastered sun breathing and the basics of Nen, he would take the hunter exam. A hunter license would grant him access to the Hunter Association's private network, which would open up a world of possibilities. The night wind rustled the curtains, revealing Snow Walker resting on its rack. Moonlight streamed through the window, bathing the boy's face in a soft, silver light. He lay down on the bed, his hands folded over his stomach, and closed his eyes. The familiar sensation of falling. He walked through the kaleidoscopic tunnel and emerged onto the shore of his subconscious sea. He stood there for a moment, letting the waves wash over his bare feet, clearing his mind. Then, he pushed open the door to the world of Demon Slayer. Bro, a shivering Tanjiro, wrapped in a blanket, poked him awake. I just went for a pee, it's freezing out there. He looked at Roy with a mixture of awe and admiration. After everything they'd been through, his brother could still sleep like a rock. There's a cloth bundle under the axe, Roy mumbled, still half asleep. Rice balls inside, heat them up by the fire. Roy went outside, washed his face with a handful of fresh snow, and returned to the now crackling fire. He took out the water flask and uncapped it. Tanjiro, while heating up their breakfast, scooted closer, hoping to bask in the faint warmth of Roy's aura. Roy ignored him and opened his aura nodes a little wider, feeding more Nen into the flask. A wisp of white smoke curled out, coalescing into the upper half of Hiro Minamino's spirit. Good morning, benefactor, the spirit said with a bow. Tanjiro, seeing the spirit's lower half trailing off into smoke inside the flask, leaned in closer. Hey, mister, are you okay in there? A sharp chop to the head from Roy sent him scurrying away, nursing the new lump. Please excuse my brother's lack of manners, Roy said to Minamino. If you're ready, we can leave as soon as we've eaten. Minamino smiled warmly at Tanjiro. The boy's earnest, pouting face reminded him of his own daughter. There's no need to trouble yourself, Master Eiichiro, he said. But there is one small matter, if you'd be so kind. When the demon attacked me, he explained, it knocked my traveling pack aside. It shouldn't be too far from here. Inside, you'll find some gifts for my family, and a small purse of money. Please, take the money as a token of my gratitude for avenging me and taking me home. Simple enough, Roy said, then looked at Tanjiro. You heard him, keep your nose sharp on the way down. After a quick breakfast, they left the shrine. It didn't take long for Tanjiro to find the pack, half buried in the snow under a pine tree. Inside was a bolt of cloth, a wooden toy horse, and some official-looking documents. That's it, Minamino's voice whispered from the flask. The cloth is for my wife and mother. The toy is for my daughter. The money, please, Master Eiichiro, it is yours. Roy picked a single copper coin from the snow and pocketed it. The rest, he had Tanjiro bundle back up in place in the pack. Minamino started to protest, but Roy simply picked up the pack and started walking towards Sagiri Mountain. In this world, a man is the pillar of his family, Roy said, not looking back. You may be gone, but your family still needs to eat. This money will help them get by. That's right, mister, Tanjiro added, smiling at the flask. More money means more candy for your daughter. Minamino let out a long, shuddering sigh, and bowed his head in profound, silent gratitude. They reached the foot of Sagiri Mountain and saw a small village nestled in the valley below. As they got closer, a familiar sound drifted up to them on the wind, the sound of a child's voice. Mama, when is Papa coming home? Chapter 29. Soul Shock X, the color of the spirit. At the eastern edge of the village, a small cluster of cabins was enclosed by a simple wicker fence. Inside the yard, a woman and a little girl were building a snowman together. The girl, bundled in a floral padded jacket, was trying to wrap a purple scarf around its neck. Her mother, her own head covered by a scarf, lifted the girl up so she could place a worn hat on the snowman's head. From a distance, the lopsided figure bore a striking resemblance to Hiro Minamino. Shizuka, do you miss Papa? I do. The hat was crooked, making the snowman look comical. The little girl giggled. Look, Mama, Papa looks so silly. The woman smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. As she laughed, she glanced towards the fence and saw them. Roy and Tanjiro, standing silently in the snow. Her expression immediately shifted. She gently moved her daughter behind her, her posture becoming wary. Can I help you? The village at the foot of Sagiri Mountain was already remote. In the dead of winter, visitors were almost unheard of. Roy held up the water flask and looked at the spirit of Hiro Minamino. The man's ghostly face was streaked with tears, his lips trembling. He stared, transfixed, at his wife and daughter, unable to speak. Bro, Tanjiro couldn't bear to watch. He turned his face away. He couldn't imagine the despair he would feel if he ever learned that his own father was gone. But in this world stalked by demons, such tragedies were a daily occurrence. After a moment, Roy stepped forward. Ma'am, he said, his voice respectful. We're friends of Mr. Minamino. We were just passing through and wanted to drop something off for him. He placed the merchant's traveling pack on the ground. The woman recognized the pack instantly, she had woven it herself from the reeds that grew on the mountain. Her posture relaxed, she opened the gate and let them in. Naoko, who is it? An elderly woman's kind voice came from inside the house. Friends of heroes, the woman, Naoko, replied. They brought something from him. Oh, well, don't just stand there in the cold. Invite the boys in for some hot tea. Yes, mother. Naoko turned back to Roy and Tanjiro, giving them a grateful bow. Roy nodded politely and stepped into the yard, with Tanjiro dragging the pack behind him. Mama, who are they? The little girl, Shizuka, whispered, peeking out from behind her mother's legs. The spirit of Hiro Minamino could no longer contain himself. He floated from the flask and reached out to embrace his daughter. A cold, ghostly wind swept through the yard. Minamino's spiritual form passed right through the little girl's body. Shizuka blinked, her small body shuddering for a fraction of a second. The change was almost imperceptible, but Roy, his eyes sharp, saw it clearly. Her spirit is still too fragile, Roy communicated to the ghost, using his nen as a medium. A direct shock from a soul as strong as yours could displace it. You must not touch her. With his Dio active, Roy could see the girl's aura flicker and recoil as the ghost passed through her. For a terrifying instant, her body's energy field seemed to mistake Minamino's soul for its own rightful owner. So the soul is the true source, the color of one's nen. Zig's notes, and everything Roy knew about the world of hunters, stated that nen was the body's life energy. Without a physical vessel, that energy should have no anchor and would dissipate. But Minamino's existence proved that a soul, a concentration of that same life energy, could persist, at least for a short time. My fault, Shizuka, I'm so sorry, Papa was too hasty. Minamino's spiritual form wavered, and he began to slap himself in anguish, his form growing fainter with each blow. Self-harm won't solve anything, Roy said, his voice cutting through the spirit's despair. He reached into the pack and pulled out the small wooden horse. Shizuka, right, he said with a warm smile. Look what your papa bought for you. He said you can play with this for now, and when he gets back, he'll be a big horse for you to ride. And candy, Tanjiro added, pulling out the sweets and offering them in his open palm. Mama, the little girl looked up at her mother, her eyes wide. Naoko gave her a reassuring pat. It's all right, Shizuka, they're your papa's friends. You can call them, Big Brother. The little girl took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was standing right in front of Roy. She reached out and took the toy horse. As she did, Roy channeled a thin, stabilizing stream of his own nen into her through the wooden toy. He watched as her flickering aura settled, the foreign energy from her father's touch receding, her own life force reasserting itself. The vacant look in her eyes vanished, replaced by the bright, innocent spark of a child. Minamino saw it all. As a spirit, his senses were far more attuned to such things. He sank to his knees, his gratitude too profound for words. Roy ignored him. He and Tanjiro each took one of Shizuka's hands and followed Naoko inside. The cabin was warm, a small stove glowing in the corner. An elderly woman, her hands red and raw from washing clothes in the cold, poured them each a cup of steaming tea. After thanking her, they got to the point, laying out the contents of the pack. Mr. Minamino bought this cloth in town, for you and your mother. The toy and the candy are for Shizuka. And this is the money he sent back. Child, the old woman's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room, silencing all other sound. Did Hiro say when he would be coming home? Chapter 30. Hiro Minamino's Gift X the Life Energy Column. Roy sipped his tea in silence. Tanjiro sat beside him, squirming, the unspoken truth a stone in his throat. The two women's faces grew pale. At first, Naoko didn't understand, but then the realization dawned on her. Her hands twisted in her lap, her fingers digging into the fabric of her kimono. After a long, heavy silence, the old woman let out a sigh that seemed to age her another 10 years. Hiro was a stubborn man, she said, her voice trembling. He treasured that pack more than his own life. He always said, the only way it would ever return without him, is if he were gone. The pack was here, the man was not, the meaning was clear. Child, the old woman said, her voice cracking, her formidable willpower the only thing holding her back from collapsing into grief. Tell me the truth, my hero, he's not coming back, is he? The air in the small cabin grew heavy, colder than the blizzard raging outside. Tanjiro turned a desperate, pleading gaze to Roy. Roy glanced at the little girl, Shizuka, who was looking from her mother to her grandmother and then to the two strangers with wide, confused eyes. He nodded at Tanjiro, who understood immediately and coaxed the girl outside to have a snowball fight. Neither woman objected. Once they were alone, Roy set his teacup down. To be honest, he said softly, I think it would be better if Mr. Minamino told you himself. The women stared at him, uncomprehending. Roy placed a hand on the table. He channeled a gentle, controlled stream of nen, using the wood as a conduit. A warm energy flowed into the two women, a temporary gyo that allowed them to see what he could see. And then they saw him. A third figure in the room, familiar and beloved. Their son, their husband, Hiro Minamino, Hiro. Mother, Naoko. Roy closed his eyes, giving them their space. He could feel his nen, the energy connecting them, fluctuating wildly with their overwhelming emotions. If everyone in this room had been a nen user, the cabin would have been filled with a swirling storm of gray, sorrowful aura. Through the window, he could hear the sound of a child's laughter. Shizuka was chasing Tanjiro, pelting him with snowballs. Tanjiro, forcing a smile, dodged and weaved, letting her win. After a long time, the quiet sobbing inside the cabin subsided. The kettle on the stove began to whistle. Naoko and her mother, their faces streaked with tears, knelt before Roy, prostrating themselves in the deepest bow of gratitude. Thank you, Master Eiichiro, they said in unison. For avenging our hero. It was nothing, Roy said, helping them up. We were just defending ourselves. You are too humble, benefactor, Minamino's voice whispered. He explained to his family how Roy had toyed with the demon, how he had used the fight to train his younger brother. That creature was no match for him. He could have ended it in an instant. Roy didn't deny it. He had finished his tea, delivered the message, and completed his task. It was time to leave. The two women pleaded with them to stay, but seeing the fresh grief in their eyes, Roy gently but firmly refused. He and Tanjiro went back out into the yard. Naoko, her mother, and a now tired Shizuka followed them to the gate. There, in front of them all, Roy handed the water flask to Minamino's mother. "This is where he rests now," he said quietly. "Keep it, so you have something to remember him by." The old woman clutched the flask to her chest, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Don't cry, mother," Minamino's voice came, gentle and reassuring. "All men must die, just think of it as me moving on to a better place." As he spoke, his spiritual form, its purpose fulfilled, began to waver and dissipate. "No, don't go," his wife and mother cried, reaching for him, their hands passing through his fading form. Roy watched in silence. "Do you want to say goodbye to Shizuka?" he asked the spirit through their Nen link. Minamino looked at his daughter, who was now trying to comfort her crying mother and grandmother, her small hands patting their cheeks. A look of infinite love and longing passed over his face, and he shook his head. "Master Eiichiro," the spirit's voice was growing fainter. "I have rarely thanked anyone in my life, and never bowed to any man but my own father. But for you, thank you. Thank you for bringing me home. For letting me be content." With a final, loving gaze at his daughter, the spirit of Hiro Minamino dissolved into a cloud of shimmering motes of light. The motes swirled and then shot towards Roy, merging with his body. "Notice, you have guided a lingering soul to peace. By accepting his final wish and bearing his karma, you have received his final gift. Life energy +1. This energy can be allocated to your physique stat." Roy flinched. He felt a sudden, immense weight in his pocket. The single copper coin he'd taken now felt as heavy as a block of lead. He took a deep breath to steady himself. So this was his real gift. He stood in the snow for a long moment, then called to his brother. They bowed one last time to the grieving family and turned towards the deep woods of Sagiri Mountain. "Goodbye, brother Tanjiro," a small voice called out from behind them. "Goodbye, Shizuka, and goodbye, Hiro Minamino," Roy added silently. The sun-patterned earring swayed in the wind as the two brothers walked away, their figures soon swallowed by the swirling snow. Chapter 31. A Physique Increase X Sabito and Makomo. Hiro Minamino was an ordinary man, a single speck of dust in a world of billions. No one, save for his family, would have ever mourned his passing. But now, there was one more. Walking through the deep, silent woods of Sagiri Mountain, Roy clutched the single copper coin in his pocket. He opened his system panel and allocated the point of life energy to his physique stat. Notice, physique, 10.55 to 11.55. A wave of intense, searing heat flooded his body. Steam began to rise from the crown of his head. Tanjiro, trudging through the deep snow behind him, looked up. For a split second, he saw his brother's frame seem to expand, his muscles swelling against his clothes. He blinked, rubbing his eyes, and when he looked again, Roy was back to his normal size. Strange. Am I just seeing things? Maybe I didn't sleep well last night. He hurried to catch up, his brow furrowed with concern. "You okay, bro?" "Okay." Far from it, every cell in his body was screaming. It took every ounce of his willpower just to keep walking. The instantaneous increase in his physique was forcing his body through years of natural growth in a matter of seconds. Cells were furiously dividing, his bone density was increasing, his blood vessels were thickening, and his muscle fibers were being torn apart and rebuilt at an accelerated rate. It was a deep, cellular agony. He finally had to stop, leaning against a tall cedar for support. "Here, drink some water," Tanjiro said, uncapping his flask. Roy took a long swallow, the cool water doing little to quench the internal fire, but it was enough. He patted his brother's back, glanced at the sky, and pushed himself to keep moving. Sagiri Mountain was famous for its perpetual fog. In the dead of winter, the sub-zero temperatures turned the mist into a clinging, crystalline hoarfrost. Tanjiro's nose was bright red, and he had to keep wiping ice from his eyelashes. He couldn't imagine what kind of person would choose to live in such a desolate place. "Bro, does anyone really live up here?" he asked, his teeth chattering. "There's no sun, no green things, it's even colder than our mountain." "Greatness is forged in hardship," Roy said, his gaze sweeping the fog-shrouded woods. His eyes, enhanced by a subtle gyo, locked onto something high up in the branches of a birch tree. Two figures, a boy and a girl, sat perched there, their faces hidden behind fox masks. "Hey, Sabito," the girl whispered, her voice soft as falling snow. "Do you think he saw us?" She was small, dressed in a flower-patterned kimono, her fox mask askew on her head. "Impossible," the boy replied, his voice calm and steady. He was older, with long, peach-colored hair, wearing a haori patterned with geometric shapes over his white robes. A scar ran down the side of his own fox mask. No one can see us unless we choose to be seen. You're right, not even Master Urokodaki can, the girl, Makomo, said, her voice tinged with sadness. She had tried so many times, standing right beside her master, watching him eat, sleep, carve his masks, but he never once acknowledged her. Don't lose hope, Makomo, the boy, Sabito, said, gently patting her head. Someone has come seeking his guidance. That's a good sign. But, Master doesn't want any more students, she whispered, her green eyes dimming with sorrow. He's too heartbroken, he doesn't want to see anyone else die because of him. That monster, it's gotten too strong. Even you. Yes, Sabito said, finishing her thought, his voice heavy. Even I was no match for it. He fell silent, watching as Roy and Tanjiro passed beneath their perch. A moment later, both he and Makomo vanished into the mist. Roy's hearing, enhanced by his nen, had caught their whispered words. Pure souls, he thought, crying out from beyond. He adjusted the basket on his back and pulled Tanjiro out of a snowdrift he'd just stumbled into. As they ventured deeper, the fog began to thin. A sliver of morning light pierced through the canopy, illuminating a small clearing. In the center of the clearing, an old man sat on a tree stump, a tengu mask covering his face. He was carving another mask, the rhythmic scrape and tap of his tools the only sound in the quiet woods. He didn't look up as they approached, completely absorbed in his work. Bro, there's someone there, Tanjiro whispered. I see him, Roy replied, holding up a hand to stop his brother from calling out. They would not disturb him. Roy set down his basket, cleared a patch of snow, and started a small fire. Tanjiro, learning from his brother, filled his flask with clean snow and set it by the fire to melt. Why aren't they going in? Makomo had reappeared. She now sat on the porch of the small cabin behind the old man, her chin resting in her hands as she watched them with curious eyes. Sabito stood beside her, and behind them, a dozen other figures slowly materialized from the mist, all wearing the same fox masks. They were the ghosts of Urokodaki's fallen students. Some watched their master carve. Others dozed against the doorframe. One boy, a mischievous glint in his eye, tried to snatch a sparrow out of the air. Another, named Shinsuke, drifted over to Roy and Tanjiro, circling them curiously. He waved a translucent hand in front of Roy's face. Roy, who was peeling a rice ball, glanced up. The ghost yelped and stumbled back, nearly falling into the fire. Ha, don't be an idiot, Shinsuke, another ghost laughed. You really think he can see you? I'm not being an idiot. Shinsuke shot back, scrambling to his feet. He cautiously waved his hand in front of Roy's face again. This time, Roy didn't react, his attention focused on his food. The ghost let out a sigh of relief. See, Fukuda, I told you, he said, and playfully tackled his friend, the two of them wrestling like children in the snow. Chapter 32, Roy's Speed X Urokodaki's Invitation. The playful shouts of the ghosts echoed in the clearing, a private concert for an audience of one. The water in the flask began to boil. Tanjiro quickly poured a cup of hot tea and handed it to his brother. Bro, he whispered, I don't know why, but I feel like we're being watched. Tanjiro, their father, was the first Kamado in 1,000 years to reach the transparent world. Perhaps it was his bloodline, or a blessing from their ancestors, but that legacy had manifested in Tanjiro as a preternaturally sharp sense of smell. It was this same sense that would one day allow him to smell the intent behind Sabito's sword strikes, a sign that he himself was on the verge of touching that same profound state of perception. So for him to feel something here, even if he couldn't explain it, was not surprising. What do you smell? I don't know. It's kind of like the scent Mr. Minamino had. As he spoke, a dozen ghostly figures swirled around him, drawn by his words. This kid's senses are sharp. Just like Master, he could always track a demon's location, and even tell how many people it had eaten, just by the smell. Maybe, he has more potential than Gyu. The spirits chattered excitedly, circling above Tanjiro's head, but none dared to pass through him. They knew the danger of a soul shocking a living being. A sudden chill ran down Tanjiro's spine. Why did it get so cold all of a sudden? He shivered and huddled closer to Roy for warmth. Roy, however, was focused. He finished his rice ball and washed it down with the tea. His gaze swept past the curious ghosts, past the surprised faces of Sabito and Makomo, and settled on the old man carving by the cabin. Eurocodiki was a study in stillness. He seemed to merge with the landscape, to be both present and not. If you weren't looking for him, you would miss him entirely. It was a state remarkably similar to Zetsu. The difference was that one relied on sealing one's nen, while the other was a state of being born from decades of discipline and mastery. Tap, tap, the sound of carving stopped. Eurocodiki's knife had slipped. Perhaps the new tool was unfamiliar, or perhaps the presence of strangers had disturbed his concentration. The fox mask he was carving now had a crooked, mocking smile. Master, Makomo whispered, her heart aching for him. Eurocodiki stared at the ruined mask for a moment, then set it aside and picked up a fresh block of wood. He began to carve again, as if he hadn't noticed them at all. Tanjiro fidgeted. Bro, should I go and knock? Knock on what? Roy thought. There's not even a gate. He drank the last of his tea. If you're getting restless, go hunt for something to eat. No, I'm staying here with you, Tanjiro said, shaking his head. Fine, I'll go. Roy stood up and, in a flicker of shadow step, vanished. He moved so fast he left an after-image, a perfect silhouette of himself sitting by the fire. Every ghost in the clearing whipped their heads around, but they were a fraction of a second too late. All they saw was the faint ripple in the air where he had been. That guy is fast, one of the ghosts exclaimed. In the next instant, Roy was back, two freshly killed rabbits dangling from his hand. The ghosts were stunned into silence. They now swarmed around Roy, their curiosity piqued, trying to figure out how a human could move like that. They kept their distance, however, parting for him as he walked. At the end of that spectral path stood Sabito, his hand resting on the hilt of his wooden sword. If you'd had that kind of speed, Makomo said to him, her eyes shining as she looked at Roy, you wouldn't have died. Sabito was silent. Even with that speed, could he really have run? What would have happened to Giyu, who in those days was still a crybaby who could barely hold his sword? He shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. This time, he said to Makomo, his voice filled with a new hope, I really think this one has a chance. Roy and Tanjiro roasted the rabbits over the fire. The smell of cooking meat soon filled the clearing. Without any spices save for a little salt Tanjiro had in his pack, the meal was simple, but it was enough to attract a crowd of hungry ghosts. Hey, Sabito, Makomo whined, her eyes glued to the sizzling rabbit in Roy's hands. Think of something. I want a bite. What am I supposed to do? Sabito thought, exasperated. You're the one who said we should just watch the meat. He fell silent, but then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something that made him go still. Rabbit tastes gamey if you don't season it first, a deep voice rumbled from beside the fire. Sakanji Eurocodiki stood there, his Tengu mask hiding his expression. The ruined fox mask he had been carving lay discarded on the tree stump. If you two don't mind, he said, his voice like the grinding of old stones, come inside. I'll prepare it properly.